All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership, your source and insight for local government technology. My name is Brendan Middleton, and today we're going to be speaking with Mark Funkhouser from Funkhouser Associates about the American Rescue Plan and key considerations for state and local governments as they navigate short and long-term priorities as funding becomes available. Hey, Mark, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Brendan. Happy to do it.
Awesome. So for our listeners, Mark is the president of Funkhouser Associates and is a municipal finance expert. He's the former mayor of Kansas City who has served as a government official, elected leader, and publisher of Governing Magazine. Mark is a trusted and credible advisor to government officials who is uniquely qualified to help them put their communities on the path to fiscal sustainability. A little bit further on Mark's background, a lot of acronyms behind his name. He's got a master's degree in social work from West Virginia University, an MBA from Tennessee State University, and an interdisciplinary PhD in public administration and urban sociology from the University of Missouri at Kansas City. So, Mark, I'd love to just dive right in here. Super relevant topic. Super excited about this conversation we're about to have. With the American Rescue Plan, state and local governments obviously are seeing immense opportunity to address some of the challenges they are facing brought on by the pandemic. Lots of questions are being asked. What's the best way to use funds? What funds are available? How do we ensure we're leveraging this unique opportunity with both not only short-term needs, but also long-term priorities in mind? So one of my first questions for you is really around the eligible uses that the U.S. Treasury announced just a couple weeks ago on May 10th. The announcement really was a long-awaited clarification on how and where the funding can and will be used. There were lots of specifics that were addressed, but also some variety of general use cases that can be left up to interpretation, honestly. Could you walk us through those eligible use cases that were released and really give us a sense for your thoughts on the intent behind some of the areas that were addressed?
For sure. So the big buckets are, supporting public health expenditures, addressing the negative consequences of the pandemic, investing in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, and replacing lost public sector revenue, and providing premium pay for essential workers. It's clear when you look at the interim final rules that they want the money spent. I was surprised when they specifically prohibited governments from using it to, at least part of it, a little of it, to replenish reserve funds. They want it on the street. They want it spent. The other thing that's pretty clear is that they intend for it to be spent to address issues of social equity. Unlike the CARES Act, they do allow you to replace lost revenue, but they're very specific about the rules about that. And then finally, there are performance reporting requirements. They're not clear yet what those are, but they clearly want to know the impact.
Great. And I know you and I discussed some of the different approaches on one of our previous conversations, some of the different approaches that the funding can be used for and certain strategies that should be considered when planning these massive amounts of expenditures. So my next question would be, what should governments be taking a hard look at when determining their overall strategy for spending?
Well, first of all, you want to address structural problems in your revenue and expenditure system if you can. So, for example, if there are investments that you can make that will more or less permanently reduce operating costs, that's a higher priority. If there are expenditures that you could make, say, in new tax software or something that allow you to be more efficient in collecting taxes and improve revenue, that's a good thing. So you have an opportunity here to make semi-permanent changes, and it's an opportunity also to be sort of transformative. So you don't want to pass that up.
Excellent. And when talking about really the immense amount of not only dollars available, but but also the opportunity this plan has provided so many jurisdictions across the country. I can't help but think of the old saying, to whom as much is given, much is expected. And specifically, I'd like to take a minute and discuss some of the reporting requirements. You alluded to them just a minute ago, but a lot is unclear. I know we haven't seen very much specific guidance on this topic just yet, but we know they're coming. We know there will be strict performance requirements on spending really at all levels. And I think there's some intent behind that and some reasoning behind that. Would you talk a little further on what this means and how it compares historically to other government stimulus funding in recent past?
Well, it's clear that they've learned lessons from, President Biden was there, he was there during ARPA. And that was, it took a long time. The recovery from the 2009 recession took almost 10 years for local governments. Jobs came back slowly. So he wants something that's quicker. He wants something that's bigger. I think some of the disappointment that he and President Obama walked away from that, they got all the downside politically, all the punishment and so forth, and not enough of the upside. So this thing, the American Rescue Plan, is really big. It's designed to have a fairly big impact fairly quickly. They learned from the CARES Act to give. So the CARES Act was big. It was bigger than ARPA. But again, it had a very short time fuse. By the time the money actually got out, you had probably less than a year to spend it. And there were you had to directly relate it in some way to pandemic-related costs. You couldn't replace lost revenue. So they've looked at that and they've said, okay, we're going to give you more time, 3 years instead of 1. We're going to allow you to replace lost revenue, and we're going to give you a lot more money. This thing is orders of magnitude bigger than ARPA and bigger than the CARES Act. So the other thing that really was exposed by the pandemic was, well, and then the murder of George Floyd, is the huge social inequities and their cost to society and to government. And so throughout this thing, they have really focused on social equity. So they want you to, they're giving you a lot of money. They're giving you more time and discretion to spend it. They want you to address systemic issues within your community having to do with social equity, many of which build up over generations. And they want you to report performance. They'd like to be able to see what the impact was. And I'm sure they're going to compare governments, one city, one big city compared to another big city, who had the biggest impact, so that folks can learn from each other. And I imagine there will be interim reporting. So as the thing is unfolding, they're going to say, well, San Antonio is doing this, and Dallas is only doing that, and Greensboro, North Carolina has done something different. And here's what seems to be working. I would be really surprised if we didn't have a lot of interim reporting about how this thing is working. And that's another big important part of this, is this whole idea of 2 tranches. The first tranche, half the money right away, and then the second tranche much later. So they're looking to sort of, it's almost like quasi-experimental. They're looking to see what happens, but they want to hold enough money back, in reserve, as it were, to be able to emphasize the things that are working right and step back from the things that aren't working as well.
And almost it seems as if potentially pivot to some degree within the 2 tranches to focus some of the dollars in specific areas based on the reporting that they're seeing have more of an impact than others. And I can imagine, you and I talked about this a little bit, that the time it's going to take to actually get some visual representation of what the impact actually is become and being had by the spending. What's your thoughts on that? The time, like I know you've got some experience in the ARPA Act and the CARES Act. what from a time perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, for example, we know it's a really good idea to do early childhood education and provide quality childcare, but the impact doesn't come for 10, 20, 30 years. And so when you look at something like that, there are, what evaluation specialists call proxy measures, things that, I know with good reliability that if I do A and B in the right way, in the right order, 10 years later, C will happen. And so part of it is to focus on those proxy measures, I think. But the other is to get the reaction of the people in the community. How are they reacting and what are they doing in response to what's happening? Because the real, we want to provoke private investment. We want to get individuals to do things differently than they're doing. So looking at that and seeing, how community, for example, affordable housing, and housing is a huge issue. How does investment patterns change if we change what we are spending the money on now? How do investment patterns change later? That's one piece of it. But the other timing thing that is really interesting, and if I were a local government leader, I'd be paying real attention to this, is that there is almost certainly going to be a huge infrastructure package coming from the federal government. I mean, they're squabbling about how to pay for it, and they're squabbling about the size. Is it only 900 and some billion, or is it 2.3 trillion? We're talking a significant chunk of change either way. And I'm certain it's going to happen. So I would want to make sure that I was positioned when the second tranche comes. I wouldn't have, for example, spent a whole lot of money on some aspect of infrastructure that I would have gotten money for in the second tranche. So I'm going to be careful about that.
That's interesting. Yeah, now that you bring it up, being careful about where you're spending the dollars in respect to infrastructure now, due to the fact that we're going to have some level, we don't know what level yet, but some level of funding in the near future for infrastructure. So that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. In terms of getting this right, honestly, it's ultimately going to come down to effective planning, obviously, and your strategy and your approach to where you're spending. But also, there's another component that I'd like to touch on is the communication aspect. Super important within organizations that there's effective internal and external communication, privately held companies, but also the public sector. Can you give some advice for local governments on areas within their community they should prioritize when making these monumental decisions that ultimately will leave a legacy for generations to come?
You're going to have to put a lot of effort into lots of different kinds of communication. Some of it's going to be, using social media. You're going to have to look at different channels of communication. You're going to have to look at different geographic areas within the city, different stakeholder groups, landlords, small business owners, restaurant owners, all these kinds of different groups. It's going to be if you do this right, you're going to have to spend an awful lot of time and energy listening to folks, but then also disaggregating data so that you can see who is responding how in what way. We've had sort of a quasi experiment with the vaccination stuff, where who is getting vaccinated, who is not. What are the arguments that are persuasive? What are the arguments that are not? And so on and so on. So that's sort of careful communication with a lot of effort across a lot of channels, but also governments need to collaborate with each other. If I'm Pittsburgh, in the Allegheny County, Pittsburgh metropolitan area, there are 100 and some other governments that are getting some amount of money. Virtually everybody is getting something. There are what are called entitlement governments. That's down to 50,000 in population, where you're getting a direct check from the feds. But then the smaller governments are getting a check, but it's filtered through the state government. And then, of course, the state itself is getting a huge amount of money. There are separate pots going to the transit agencies. There's a separate fund for restaurants. And so you want to, if I'm, again, hypothetically in Pittsburgh, I want to know what those other governments are doing. I want to know what Allegheny County is doing. I want to know what the state of Pennsylvania is doing. I want to know what the transit authority is doing. And I want us to be talking together. Now, during the CARES Act period, for lots of reasons, there was a real ramp up in regional communication. People in government, city managers, county executives, and so on and so forth, school district superintendents, they suddenly spent a lot more time talking to each other on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever. You need to carry that forward. Keep those relationships, keep talking to those folks, see where it is that we can pool our money or coordinate our efforts strategically to have the maximum impact.
And also connecting the dots between decision making and the benefits for the actual constituents that you're entitled to serve is super important. And then reporting back on it. When you're making the proposition, connect the decision that is being proposed to the benefits directly applied to the citizens. And then also through the reporting and through the dissemination of outcomes, report back on that, and it unifies the community and it brings everybody together in an intentional way, which moves everyone forward together. So that's a really good point, Mark. So thanks for drawing attention to that. I can't thank you enough for doing this. You certainly have a pulse on the market, Mark. I know this is a super relevant topic, and I can't thank you enough for providing your thoughts and advice for government leaders across the nation as they navigate this opportunity. For any of our listeners, though, I'd love to. Lots of questions have been coming in as we broadcast this coming out. But how can they get in touch with you if they have other questions?
Mayorfunk.com. That's our website, and you can send me an email, mark@mayorfunk.com. And I really love listening to folks and talking to folks in local government. I do it every day. It's the source of inspiration for me.
Excellent, easy enough. Mayorfunk.com. Can't remember that one. Pretty easy. So for our listeners, thanks so much for joining us here on another episode of the Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership. Please stay tuned for more local government news and insights to come. We look forward to tracking this and providing some more content around this specific topic, but other areas of local and state government, identifying challenges and trends and solutions that government leaders are finding as they do their daily work. So we look forward to having you join us next time. Thanks so much.